Hello, everyone. This is Shazad Mirza from the Global Cyber Alliance. We have about a minute or two until we start the actual session. But just as a reminder to folks that there is a questions box that is available to you in the GoToWebinar control panel. Please feel free to post any questions that you have on in the panel at any point in time. We'll most likely get to the questions that you have posted towards the end, unless the presenter notices a few questions that he can't answer during the session. So we'll start in about 2 minutes. Hello, everyone. My name is Shazad Mirza. I'm the Director of Operations for Global Cyber Alliance, and I'd like to welcome you to the second session of week 5 of the GCA DMARC Bootcamp. Again, just before we get started, just as a reminder, there is a questions box that is available to you. If you have any questions, please post those questions in that box, and we'll most likely get to those questions towards the end of the webinar. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and hand it over to John Wilson from Agari, and he will go ahead and talk about DMARC reporting.
Great, thank you, Shirzad. So for all of you folks, I'm going to spare you seeing me on video. However, if you do want to know what I look like, here is a picture of me. Without further ado, I am going to close that and get started. So to start off with, you have a lot of choices to do DMARC. Many of you will decide to do this yourselves. You will set up a DMARC record, and you will have the report sent to yourself, and you will do whatever you will with those reports, and ultimately use them to figure out who should be authorized to send mail on your behalf, who should not be authorized, and then get SPF and DKIM properly configured for those folks. So I'm going to start off as if you had no tool whatsoever, that if you decided to do this yourself. And so here I am in the terminal window, and I am going to look up the DMARC record for Agari. So the command that I'm going to use is called dig. All it does is a DNS query, and I'm going to look up the DMARC record for Agari, which will be at _DMARC.agari.com. It's a TXT resource type, and I'm going to use the plus short modifier. And what this means is that I'm not going to get a whole bunch of diagnostic information with this output. I'm just going to get the record itself. And when I run that command, I get two things. The first thing I get is actually a redirect. We at Agari actually are able to host DMARC records on behalf of our customers. So there's two ways that people could work with us. They could either put their own record in, or they can put a CNAME pointing at a special indicator that we give them, and then we maintain that record automatically. In this case, we're using, eating our own dog food, so to speak, or in this case, drinking our own champagne, I guess our marketing folks would prefer. And here we see that we have a pointer to _DMARC.o2.da. blah, 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 so on and so forth. And then the actual record is returned, which is V = DMARC1, P = reject, which is our policy, how we want unauthenticated mail to be treated. SP = reject, that's how we want our subdomains treated if they do not have their own specific record in place. RI is the reporting interval. 3600 is 1 hour. Now, I will warn you that most of the providers report on a 24-hour boundary. So the vast majority of folks who will give you reports back are going to ignore that RI parameter and are simply going to send you 1 report a day, irregardless of what you put in the reporting interval parameter. The next piece is really the most important, and that is, where do you want your data sent? Now, we're sending our data to ourselves. However, that is a very special address in that it is automatically ingested into our commercial offering. In your case, you would probably just simply have this be sent to yourselves, or if you're using perhaps a different vendor, they will give you an address to send the record to. The next portion is the RUF tag. This is where forensic information should be sent. Now, I will warn you, the vast majority of providers do not support forensic information. So do not be surprised if you publish a DMARC record with an RUF tag and find you don't get anything back. Here's another case where working with a vendor can be helpful. Most of the DMARC vendors have special relationships with certain providers, as well as additional data sources, which may give you access to forensic data that you would not otherwise have. The last piece, FO equals 1, says that if 1 or more of the authentication protocols, in other words, if either SPF or DKIM were to fail, we would like to get a forensic copy back. Again, the vast majority of providers are going to ignore that. Now, if you did go ahead and publish a record like that and told it to send the data to yourselves, what's going to start happening is at the end of each day, you're going to be bombarded with a bunch of emails coming from the various providers. I have one of those emails here. This one is from no reply DMARC support at google.com. In other words, it's a report from Google. It's telling us that it's for the report domain Agari, and it's been sent to us from Google, and it has a unique report ID. The actual content of that message is this zip file. So it's typically base 64 encoded. It's going to come across, and if you have any sort of a modern mail reader, you're going to be able to rip that attachment off, and you will now have a zip file. I've already gone ahead and done that, so I'm using the Betty Crocker method here. You put the uncooked cake into the oven and immediately pull out the cooked cake. Here we have that XML file. And we'll take a real quick look at it. I'm not going to go into all the details here, but in a moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in and I'm going to show you how you would do all of this using a commercial tool. In this case, since I work for Agari and I'm most familiar with the Agari tool, that is the one I will be using. But I don't want you to think that this is an Agari commercial. There are definitely other providers out there. Their systems are, somewhat different, and yet they all ultimately are designed to achieve the same thing. So how you do this in the tool of your choice may vary. But again, I'm going to show you how we do this in Agari. So looking at this XML file, it's got a little bit of a header here, just sort of saying that it's an XML document. Next, we have some information that's called the report metadata. This really just lets us see, information as to who the provider was, what the report ID was. If we needed extra information, here's a URL we could go to, a few other things. And then very importantly, this is the date range specified in Unix time format. This is the date range that the report refers to. So effectively, the reporting interval that is being used for this particular report. Tomorrow, what you see as the end will theoretically become the begin number, and you'll get a different number for the end, so on and so forth. Next, the provider will give you kind of an excerpt, if you will, of how they read your DMARC record. And so this information really came directly from our DMARC record. It's saying that this is for agari.com, that our alignment for DKIM, there are 2 variations there, relaxed and strict. We are using the default of relaxed. You notice there was no tag in our DMARC record specifying the strict option, so we are using the relaxed option. Similarly with SPF, the relaxed option, and they're simply telling us back the policy and subdomain policy that we had published in our record. And finally, the percentage value. Now this percentage value can be confusing to some. This says, I want you to apply the policy to this % of my mail. This can be helpful as you're ramping up and deciding, all right, I'm going to make that giant leap from P equals none to P equals quarantine. Now, when I do that, I don't want my marketing team to come screaming at me, and I don't want a bunch of mail to go missing. So what I might do is say only quarantine 10% of my mail. And so in that case, I would put in a tag in my DMARC record that would say PCT equals 10. Now I could ramp that up later to 50 and eventually get it to 100. The default is 100, which is what we're using. Now what's confusing about this, if you are at P equals reject and your PCT is 50%, what do you think happens to the other 50%? You might think that, oh, the other 50% will simply be delivered if it were to fail. No, actually, it drops down one policy level. So if you're at P equals reject and PCT equals 50, half of the failures will be rejected, half of the failures will be quarantined. Needless to say, this is somewhat non-deterministic, and therefore we very much encourage people to get to the point where that PCT equals 100, which will mean that all of your mail would be quarantined or rejected, depending on your policy. Finally, we get the individual records, and there's going to be loads and loads and loads of these, but effectively, it's telling us the IP address that the receiver saw sending mail using our domain in the from header, and there'll be a bunch of these. I'm just going to copy this first one, this 40.107.81.104. The next is account. How many messages did they see from that particular IP address? And then they're going to say, you know, they evaluated the policy, and after doing so, what were the results? Well, DKIM passed, SPF passed, and therefore the disposition was none. In other words, this is a legitimate message. So it did not have a policy applied to it, and it was delivered. And then we have some additional identifiers and some other information, the specifics on the DKIM. So what was validated for DKIM? In other words, what was the signing domain? And for SPF, what was the envelope domain where the SPF check was performed? And then we go on to the next one, and this thing goes on for pages upon pages upon pages upon pages. Now, what would you do with that information? Well, you know, again, if you're not using a vendor, you're going to have to go and figure out what those codes mean. You're probably going to dump this into some sort of a database or a spreadsheet, but eventually you're going to want to enrich that data. And one of the things you want to do, for example, is get the host name associated with that IP address. Let me add the short modifier there. And I see that that particular one is this mail EOP BGR 810104.outbound.protection.outlook.com. I'll give you guys a little hint. It should be fairly obvious, but this means that a Microsoft server, specifically Microsoft Office 365, has sent this particular message. All right, so that was all very academic, but the purpose of today really was to show you how you might use a tool from a vendor or perhaps something open source to do this and make this much easier. So I'm going to switch over here to my browser window, if I can find it. That is not the browser window I wanted. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to start off and show you what I just did there. I'm going to look up the DMARC record for Agari.com. You can see that I'm just in a web browser here, and I'm using a tool known as Agari Brand Protection. And the record comes back, and it's telling me a couple of interesting things. First of all, remember I mentioned that we have the capability to host DMARC records for our customers. Some of our customers will simply publish a DMARC record just like you would if you were sending it to yourselves. In other words, you would enter the DMARC record directly as a text resource. If one of our customers decides they would rather have us host the record, they instead publish a CNAME. In this case, our record is hosted with Agari, and so we're giving you that little information here. Next, we're giving you all of the tags that were contained in the record, and we give you some information on what it means. But effectively, we've done the same thing, exactly what I did with the dig tool, so no magic there. All right. And let's see, I'm just taking a look if there's some questions. Oh yes, the session is being recorded. And my apologies that there's some audio buffering. I hope that it's not buffering for other folks, but yes, the session is being recorded. All right, so we looked up the Agari.com record. Now, you remember that IP address that I showed you. So let's go take a look at the data for Agari.com. This is a tool we call the data analyzer within Agari, and it's showing us a trend line over the last 14 days of all the data for all of our domains that we have in the system. I'm going to go in and say I'm only interested in Agari.com, and furthermore, you remember that IP address, I'm going to go and say I only want to see information for that particular IP address. This is going to effectively filter the data, and we're going to see that as I saw in that XML file, that things from that IP address are passing. I'm seeing 3 here instead of 2. I pulled that file on a different date about a week ago, so probably it's, you know, if you went back far enough, you'd see a day with just 2 there. And if I look at the details of that, here we see that host name. We've pulled that same PTR name out, that EOP-BGR810104.outbound.protection.outlook.com. I also see a little bit of additional information. I see the sender base reputation score. This is actually something that we get from Cisco Talos, and I like to think of it as a credit score for an IP address. So in this case, the score goes from a -10 to a +10. Now you can actually go and look this up. There's a similar service from a company called ReturnPath called Sender Score. That one ranges from 0 to 100, but it gives you an idea if that server is known to send a lot of spam. So let's suppose, for example, that you have your own server that you set up maybe on Amazon or some other provider, and you're sending mail out of that server. And you see that it has a sender base score in a tool like this, or, you know, again, you can look these up publicly. There's a place on the Cisco website you could look up this for yourself, and you see that it has a score of, say, -5. That's a bad score. Now, if you're certain that that's really your server and really sending your mail, you may find that you're having deliverability problems because the content that's coming out of that server is being perceived as spammy by the receiving side. In this case, that's not happening. This is an Office 365 server. Obviously, a lot of mail that comes out of there might be somewhat spammy, but overall, it's generally considered good. If our country database were completely up to date as of this moment, you would see the country here. This is another lookup you can do. There's plenty of databases. I use a site called IP to location, for example, where you can put in an IP address and see the country where that IP address is associated. Again, this can be helpful if you're trying to track down some unknown quantity. Here, obviously, it's Office 365, so it's not really that confusing. Next, we see the SPF pass percentage. So we have calculated for this 14-day window how much of the mail coming out of that server has passed SPF, including the alignment check. Same thing with DKIM, and then finally the combined, the DMARC. Now you may find, if you calculate this out, you may have half your messages passing SPF, half passing DKIM, but 100% passing DMARC because only one or the other need pass. Typically though, you're going to have some kind of an overlap. You might have 90 here, 90 over there, and the total might be 92 because some will pass both, some will pass one, some will pass the other. Now, I can actually show you what that looks like. If you see this third report that I have on the left, it says which messages pass DMARC with SPF and DKIM. This is going to look at all the passing messages and paint things a little bit differently. If I had messages passing only SPF, they would be colored in yellow. If I had messages passing only DKIM, they would be colored orange. If they're passing both of these standards, they're colored in green. Now I'm going to come out here and I'm going to remove that IP address restriction. And I'm going to resubmit to show you sort of what things look like in a little more detail. And you'll see that on October 2nd, looks like there was a bit of a spike in mail, and it went out passing DKIM only and failed SPF. So that's a little bit curious. I want to take a closer look at that. So I'm going to click on that orange. And again, this, you know, if you're using a different tool, presumably they would have a way to similarly drill down and find some more information. If you build your own tool, put this into a spreadsheet or a database, you're going to want to run certain searches or queries to try to locate anomalous situations. And if we look at the top things here, I see these servers: Potomac1060.mktomail.com, Potomac1059.mktomail, Potomac1058.mktomail, and this absmtp.mktomail. Those seem to be the biggest offenders, if you will, that have failed SPF and have only passed DKIM. And they're failing with a very specific reason, which is identifier misalignment. Now, when I look at those, it's quite possible. Remember, if I had just the XML files, I would just have this IP address. I would look up these hosts, and I would do that for all of these, and you'd see this huge list. And then I have to figure out, what is this entity? What do I do about this? Is this, is this just a relay? If you think about DKIM generally, so long as the relay is not modifying the message, DKIM will survive that extra hop. SPF will never survive a relaying hop, because either the source IP address will change, but the envelope domain will remain the same, or some relays will change the envelope domain, but will leave obviously the source IP address also changes, and what you get is a situation where SPF will pass. However, SPF, when it comes to DMARC, will fail due to alignment, because the envelope domain is no longer properly aligned with the domain in the from header. So that's what seems to be happening here. But my question really is this a first-party sender? In other words, something that's actually sending mail on my behalf, and just the SPF isn't configured properly? Or is it a relay? Well, first of all, based on that quantity, that's a pretty large quantity. But the other thing I'm going to want to figure out is, what the heck is this mktomail.com? And there are sources where I can find this out. I can do a whois lookup. So going back to my window here, I can do a whois on mktomail.com, and I can try to figure out who this belongs to. Now, it turns out it belongs to a company called Marketo, which was more recently, somewhat recently anyway, acquired by Adobe. So whois can be helpful for this. I will warn you though, thanks to GDPR and thanks to people who do private registrations, a whois lookup may possibly not tell you who is actually sending that mail, and you might not get a company name. Now, within the Agari portal, we do this a slightly different way. We like to up-level the information so that you don't have to go and do that extra lookup to figure out what MKTO mail is. And we do that with our diagnostics senders. So this is showing me, I'm going to look just at the ones for Agari.com. It's going to show me all of my approved senders. And you can see that we're using MailChimp. And you can see the volume for the last, I believe it's 14 days by default, and the percentage that passed SPF and the percentage that passed DKIM. We also see that there is indeed an SPF record here. Next, we have Office 365, not surprisingly. Remember that first IP address we looked up. We do see some mail coming out of Google. We see mail coming out of Zendesk, et cetera, et cetera. However, Marketo is not here, and I sort of gave away the punchline here. After doing that bit of research, we would figure out, in this case, that that entity is known as Marketo, which is now owned by Adobe. So the challenge I have now, whether I came to this by going through a spreadsheet or using some other vendor's tool, is I need to figure out if Marketo really should be authorized. I don't want to be adding Marketo to my SPF record if it's just a relay. I also don't want to be adding it to my SPF record if it belongs to some, if some criminal set up an account with Marketo and is using my domain to, send out Viagra ads, for example. So I want to figure out what exactly Marketo is sending. Have they been doing this for a while? That could be an indicator that they probably are authorized. Most criminals, will set up a server, do something evil for a day or two, and then stop doing it. So by looking at those patterns and possibly also looking at forensic information, I may be able to determine if Marketo should be authorized or not. So I'm going to just drill in on the information from Marketo, and I see a 14-day window, and I see that big spike on October 2nd. Not a big surprise. You remember back down here, we had that big orange spike again on October 2nd. But I'm going to go and look at a much longer time frame. Instead of looking at just 14 days, I'm going to go back a year. However, if I had 365 bars on this bar chart, it would become an eye chart instead of a bar chart. So I'm going to go and look at monthly. You'll notice here that in my system, it's automatically sent the filter here. Or actually, I need to set the filter to look at just Marketo. And when I submit this, remember, it's running a whole year's worth of data here, summarizing it by month and showing me, it's clear that Marketo has been sending mail using Agari.com in the from header for quite some time. There seems to be a cyclical variation, but this has been ongoing quite some time. So my gut so far is telling me this is probably a legitimate source, but I'd like to take it a step further. So I'm going to go in and see if we have any failure samples, those forensic samples related to Marketo. So I'm simply going to come in here. At Agari, we only store forensic samples for up to 2 weeks. So I'm going to start with looking at the full time range. I know that I'm looking at Agari.com, and I'm specifically interested in messages that are sent by Marketo. And it turns out I do have 2 samples. Now, you saw that was a huge bar on the bar chart, all of which failed SPF. My FO tag was a 1, so I should have gotten a forensic report back for each and every one of them. Even the places that do send back forensic reports do not necessarily send 1 report for every failure. So, and if you're not working with a vendor, it's unlikely you're going to see any forensic samples. Now, what do I see here? I don't see the content of the message. I don't have the full body, but I do have some information. I have the IP address, the host name. We enrich it with that sender-based score. I see that both SPF and DKIM passed, but when the alignment check was considered, SPF failed. And it's telling me here what my SPF issue was. It says that the mail from domain, in other words, the envelope domain, which was potomac1050.mktomail.com, did not match the from domain. And the from domain we see down here was agari.com. So there's a mismatch there. The problem is identifier misalignment, but more importantly, I'm able to see the subject line. Released today, is your supply chain protected from vendor email compromise? And when I look at this, and if you were to look at this for your company, presumably you would recognize this as a subject line used by, in this case, your marketing team in a recent campaign, and you would say, oh, okay, I get it, I understand now. This is a company that clearly is being used by our marketing team, sending mail. The last thing I can check are the URLs. And you can see here that in our tool, all of these URLs are colored green. Now, again, if you were to get your hands on a forensic report, you could extract the URLs, and you would need to go through each and every one of them and see if that's a trustworthy URL, or if that URL perhaps is sending you off to a site that's got malware in it, or maybe it's a phishing website or something of that nature. We do that automatically in our tool. We color the known good ones green. The ones that are questionable would be simply left as black, and then I would only have to go and investigate the ones that were black. But given everything that I've seen here, it's clear to me that Marketo is a legitimate sender. And I now need to figure out, how do I fix that SPF alignment issue? Now, if you're on your own, doing this without a vendor, you would pick up the phone, and first you would probably have to track down or even if you are working with a vendor, you're gonna have to track down your contact who is working with Marketo. So somebody probably within your marketing team in this case, probably has a relationship with Marketo. They've signed a contract with this company to send mail on their behalf. Once you identify that individual in your company, you would ask them, hey, can you introduce me to the support person over at Marketo who can help us get this set up. Now, if you're working with a vendor, the vendor may do that for you, may make some of those calls for you to work to get this set up. Now, at Agari, one of the things we're able to do is come back here, and the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to simply approve Marketo. So I'm going to say for Agari.com, I want to approve Marketo as an approved sender. Within Agari, since we're hosting the record, this is automatically going to enter those Marketo IP addresses into our SPF record. If you are hosting your own SPF record, you would need to go and update your DNS to add this. But the thing to bear in mind, since it is not aligned, nobody is going to be looking at the Agari.com SPF record for to see if these messages should pass. So there's a second piece that has to happen. What I need to do is I need to work with Marketo, and I need to get them to change the domain they're using in the envelope. Now, each vendor has different capabilities. Some vendors may be able to do this, or senders, I mean. Other senders may not be able to do this. So in this case, we maintain a knowledge base on the better known senders. And here we have looked, and they do indeed support SPF alignment. They also support Deacon alignment. So this now begs the question, all right, well, if they support SPF alignment, why is my SPF passing at 0%? And again, I could drill down, and we know the reason. It's identifier misalignment. Why am I not configured properly? Well, here we can get a little bit of a hint. If I go in and I look at this sender profile, this is a hand-curated knowledge base, if you will, about the better known third-party senders. So we've got the sender's logo here. If I wanted to kind of put my own definition in here that would be specific to my company, we have the capability to do that. We tell you where the website is, so if I don't even know what the heck Marketo is, I can go and read up on it so that I don't sound like an idiot when I go talk to my marketing team. But now is some important information here, and it says for SPF, Marketo supports aligned SPF provided that you use their dedicated IP option. So that's a bit of a hint. So this now makes me wonder, okay, well, am I sharing those IP addresses with somebody else? Or do I have a dedicated IP address? Maybe it's some screw up over at Marketo, or maybe nobody bothered to say, hey, I want a dedicated IP address. So what's happening here effectively is either Marketo has allocated certain servers and they're only using them for Agari, or they haven't bothered to allocate specific servers and they're just using a big giant pool of servers that are blasting out mail, not just for Agari, but for other people. Now, if you were on your own, you really wouldn't have any way to figure this out. You would have to call Marketo and talk to them and ask them effectively, do we have a dedicated IP address? At Agari, since we have so many different people using our solution, and other vendors, I assume, would have similar information, we can go in and take a closer look. So if I just go here on this bar, you see the 4 servers that Marketo is using to service Agari.com. I can go in and ask our system for additional information about those IP addresses. And one of the things I can get are a list of all the domains that Agari has witnessed sending mail or appearing in the from header on messages sent out of that particular server. And as you can see, Agari.com is here. However, there are a bunch of others here. Deluxe.com, Convene.com, CiscoGarage.com, Telus.com. Looks to me like we're sharing this. They clearly have not allocated it just to Agari.com. We're sharing it. So now what would I do if I wanted to fix this problem? I would track down the person at my company who's got a relationship with Marketo. I would say, hey, we want to fix this SPF problem. You probably have to explain to that person what the heck SPF is, explain to them the benefits of why we're going to try to authenticate our mail, and you'll have that long conversation. And then you're going to say, I need you to introduce me to your Marketo support person. And then you're going to, set up a support case with Marketo, and you're going to say, hey, we want a dedicated IP address. Most likely Marketo is going to come back and say, hey, that's fantastic. We think that's a great idea. It's going to cost you this much extra dollars each month. Do you want to do this or not? And at this point, you're going to have a business decision to make. Do we want to spend X dollars extra per month to get our dedicated IP address, and now we can get our SPF to be aligned? Or are we just going to rely on DKIM? Now, DKIM of the two protocols is the stronger protocol. It will survive relaying. SPF does not, and only one or the other has to pass. So as you can see at Agari, we have opted to go with DKIM alone. We did not feel it was worth the additional money. However, at your company, you may make the other decision. You may say, yes, we want to go through this extra step, and we would like to have this done. You will, sign an updated contract with Marketo. They will reconfigure some stuff on their side. You, in the meantime, will put an include for the Marketo IP addresses into your SPF record, or if you're using a vendor who can sort of do that automatically, you'll simply check the box that says, yes, we want to include Marketo, as you would do here with Agari. And now, once all those changes are made, Marketo will be properly authenticated. Now, that's not going to change the past, but what you should see after you do that is when you come in and you look at your trend, and you're looking specifically at the information coming out of Marketo, I'm going to look at this report. So if I were to watch and if I started to make those changes, I would want to take a look a week from now and make sure that this orange bar a week from now, the new one, would be green. And that would tell me that it was properly fixed. If you were doing this, with sort of a system you built yourself, you would want to look at the data, say a week from now, and you would hopefully see that now not just DKIM is passing, but rather DKIM and SPF are both passing and aligned. Now, one of the things that we can do here in the Agari system that'll make this a little bit easier is, because I might forget to come and check in a week, I can schedule a report. And I can say, in a week, let's do it on Friday. Actually, I don't do anything on Friday. Let's do it next Monday. I would like to get a PDF report of this particular snapshot, and it'll be a rolling window. You can see it's already selected my name, and I can give the report a name. I'm going to say, check if Marketo issue has been resolved. And I hit schedule, and now what will happen is every week on Monday, I'm going to get an email, in this case from the Agari system, with this report with the most recent data. And what I will hopefully see in the PDF attachment that would be associated with that is that orange bar this week, maybe next week it's orange too, but maybe the week after that, finally it's green, and I know that the issue has been solved. So that was an example. If anyone has any questions on what I've just shown you, feel free to go ahead and punch those questions into the, just ask them on the box there in the webinar controls. If I see any pop up, I'll do my best to answer, but if not, take a quick little pause here, and then I'm going to jump in and we'll talk about a different topic. All right. So when you are, oh, fantastic. We've got some questions coming in. Let's see. All right. And all right. Oh, this is an excellent question. All right. What do you do if you decide Marketo should not be sending your email? Ah, that is fantastic. So in this case, you'll notice that the messages were passing DKIM. So if I do nothing, those messages will continue to pass DMARC. Now, let's suppose they weren't passing DKIM or SPF, and I've decided that no, this is garbage. They should not be sending mail. I don't want them sending mail. I literally do nothing, and when I get my domain to reject or quarantine, the messages will be blocked if I'm at reject, or they will be put in the spam folder if I'm at quarantine. So I basically don't have to do anything. In this instance, since they are already passing DKIM, if I don't want Marketo sending mail on my behalf, I'm probably going to have to call Marketo and tell them to knock it off. Now, this Marketo would probably be a bad example, and the reason being that people pay very good money to Marketo to have them send mail on their behalf. But you might see, for example, some random server at a much smaller provider sending mail, and it's maybe passing DKIM, and you're like, no, they shouldn't be doing that. You're probably going to have to track down that provider and tell them to stop it. Now, bear in mind that a lot of what you see that passes DKIM only probably is going to just be relayed mail or forwarded mail. So let me show you how we can tell a forwarder versus an originator of email. So I'm going to just go back. I'm going to completely reset this view. So once again, now I am looking at every domain that we have in our account here at Agari, which I'll show you actually the domains. This is a report that shows us all of the domains that we are using within our account. Each of our customers gets a similar view like this, and they would see their domains. I'm logged in as Agari, so I'm seeing Agari's domains. The main one here, agari.com, we can see that we have approved mail coming out of MailChimp, Marketo, Office 365, Google, SparkPost, Zendesk, Salesforce. But what about all of these over here? These unapproved senders. Symantec Cloud, which is also known as, it used to be called Message Labs, 120 messages. But you'll notice those 120 messages, 0% of them are passing SPF, 99% of them are passing DKIM. Chances are that's a relay. Now, how do I know they're a relay? Well, I know they're a relay for a couple of reasons. First of all, Symantec Lab is an email security gateway. They are used by many corporations around the world as their gateway. So they have mail flowing in and flowing out from there. What will often happen is somebody will set up a rule on their system that says, hey, forward a copy of every message that comes into my work account, forward a copy of every one of those off to my Yahoo account or off to my Gmail account. What's going to happen in that instance is the message is going to hit Symantec. Symantec is going to see that rule that, oh, hey, this guy wants a copy of that mail sent over to his Yahoo account. It's going to route that over to Yahoo. What's going to happen at the end of the day is Yahoo is going to go and gather up all that mail, and some of the IP addresses they're going to see are going to be those Symantec Message Labs IP addresses. However, when Yahoo sees that mail, SPF will fail, either due to alignment or because the IP address was not contained in the original, in the SPF record for the domain and the envelope. But those messages typically will pass DKIM. The other reason that I know this is a relay is because I happen to know that it is a gateway, and gateways very often will relay mail. Mailgun is kind of an interesting one. People can set up relays on Mailgun, or people can use Mailgun to originate mail. So that would be one that would take a little bit more digging in. That is interesting though, that SPF is passing, but Mailgun is listed as unapproved. So that is a little bit interesting. Mail.ru, it's basically a Russian webmail provider. Why on earth would a Russian webmail provider be sending Agari.com email? If we look over here, 21% is passing DKIM. So about 21% of that is being relayed and relayed cleanly with no errors. Again, because the SPF is at 0, there's a decent chance that it's a relay. I know it's a relay again because it's a webmail provider versus a third party that would typically originate mail. But I could also dig in. What is going on with this mail.ru? So I'm going to look at these 56 messages. And here we see some failures and we see some passes. And when I look at the specifics of SPF versus DKIM, when it is passing, it's passing with DKIM. And I can ask the system, well, specifically, when it fails DKIM, why is it failing DKIM? And it's simply telling me DKIM fail, pretty generic thing. There are other reasons things can fail DKIM. For example, the selector might not exist. It could be an alignment issue with DKIM. It could be that the body hash has changed. In this case, whoever's reporting the data back through those DMARC reports is simply saying that DKIM has failed for, just some sort of generic reason. I can look here and see what the provider is specifically. And I see in this case, the receiver is the mail.ru group. So in other words, the people reporting this data back to me are mail.ru specifically. Chances are somebody set up a mail.ru account, and then they set up another account at mail.ru and said, I want you to forward all the mail to address 1 at mail.ru. I want you to send it to address 2 at mail.ru. Message starts out at Agari. It hits that first server at mail.ru, and one of two things happens. It gets relayed cleanly to the second address, and now it gets reported back by mail.ru, or it gets relayed uncleanly back. My guess is what's happening here is that mail.ru is probably breaking the DKIM signature. So the first time it hits the front door at mail.ru, it's going to pass. That's where you saw the the ones that passed, and then the second time it relays, it's going to fail. And some of them, they're just going to butcher that DKIM signature. I know that may have been a little bit hard to follow, but you will definitely see in your DKIM reports loads and loads and loads of places that you're going to look at and scratch your head and say, I don't understand. Why are there 3 messages? They're only passing DKIM, and they're coming out of this weird provider in Russia or Lithuania or some other place. I don't understand what's going on. And you're going to have to sort of research those. And in this case, you would find out, oh, it's mail.ru. They're a Russian webmail provider. Chances are somebody set up some sort of relay or a forwarding rule, and that's why they're seeing mail flow through those particular servers. Another one you may commonly see would be university forwarders. For example, when I graduated my university a few years later, they sent me a letter in the mail, and they said, hey, we're pleased to offer a very new service for all of our alums. We are giving you an email address that you can use for the rest of your life. All you need to do is tell us where you want us to send that mail. Now, if somebody were to send a message to that address, what you're going to see in your DMARC report is an IP address belonging to my university. And so even though the actual message ultimately arrived in my Gmail mailbox, there is going to be an entry in your DMARC report that's going to say that one of these messages came out of my university, an alumni forwarder. And so when you look at your list of servers, chances are you're going to see a lot of things there, places like Cornell, MIT, USB, any university you can think of on the planet, you're going to see possibly some IP addresses from that university in that list of servers. All right, I'm just checking if there are any other questions. I don't see any other questions, so I will forge ahead, but I did want to show you one thing. We have a way within Agari to show us just known forwarders. Now, I have to be clear here. There are so many different relays and forwarders, mailing lists, et cetera, on the planet that it would be pretty much impossible to track every single one of them. But one of the things we like to do is to help at least remove some of the obvious relays or forwarders when you're looking at the data so that you can concentrate initially on the sources that are originating mail for your domain. So one of the things I can do in here in this report is say that I only want to see the things that are coming from within my sender inventory. In other words, the things that I have approved. This is an Agari concept. Other vendors may have a similar concept, that you've authorized the server or not authorized the server. And that is independent of whether it is properly authenticated or not. It's effectively like making a punch list of all the things that should be authenticated, which maybe today are not properly authenticated. And it's a list really, what do I need to do in order to get those authenticated? So I'm going to say that any sender that I've authorized within my sender inventory, and I want to ignore any known forwarder IP addresses. And when I do that, I see, this timeline here. And what is of concern to me are any of these failures. Remember, these are things that originated at a place that I said should be authorized. However, they're not properly passing. And you'll remember that my record is at P equals reject. So I'm interested in knowing what happened to these. There's a very good chance these messages have been rejected. We have a report here that'll actually show us the disposition. It says what's happening to messages failing DMARC. And we see that some of them, the receiver has decided to override my policy. Now, why would a receiver do this? Well, remember, I told you about all of those relays and forwarders. When Google gets a message and they are going to relay it to maybe a Gmail account or another Google Apps for Business account, they're going to do that through SMTP. So that message is going to come in the front door at Google, and chances are when it arrives there, the SPF, the DKIM are all going to be perfect. They're going to be intact. But along the process of relaying and forwarding within Google's network, that authentication may get messed up. They may rewrite a header that had been signed, or they may make some small change to the body content. That's going to break the DKIM signature. And we already know that whenever mail is relayed or forwarded, that the SPF alignment or the SPF check itself, one or the other, is going to break. You can't relay mail and have SPF survive that. So what Google will do is, if they know it was fine when it came in the front door, but something broke within their own network, but they knew it was fine at the very beginning, they're going to override that policy because they know that they already checked it and it's perfectly fine. So if I click on that gray, I see that most of the ones that were reported as overridden were overridden by Google. And we see here these two servers, which happen to be Google servers. So that's exactly what's happened here. But what about the rest? These were actually rejected. So I had 21 messages that Google said they rejected. And they rejected ones that were coming from, it looks like, Office 365 servers. It looks like a lot of Office 365 servers. And when I look at the details of that, what I'm seeing are that the envelope domain is mismatched. So there's definitely some confusing stuff going on here. This one, DePaul.edu, looks to me like probably it was a relay. So Agari had a message, they sent it, to somebody who gave a DePaul.edu address. It went to that DePaul server. DePaul then apparently, removed the DKIM signature perhaps, or maybe the message never had a signature in the first place. They modified the envelope and then they relayed that over to Google. By the time Google got it, it passed SPF, but it passed for DePaul.edu. It did not pass for Agari.com. Since Google never got a chance to see valid authentication at the front door, they're going to assume that somebody's pulling a fast one here. And it's possible somebody is. It's entirely possible that somebody at DePaul figured out a way to use their server to try to send bogus Agari.com mail, and DMARC worked exactly as it should. The message was prevented from reaching the recipient's inbox, and it was blocked. So you will see things like this in your DMARC data, and you are going to probably get confused by some of these. Now, the advice I would give to folks, focus on the big picture. Identify those originating senders, the places that are actually originating the mail. Make sure that at a bare minimum, every one of them is doing a DKIM signature and that DKIM signature is properly aligned. That is going to give you your greatest chances that those messages, if they are indeed relayed or forwarded, will continue to pass. If you can get SPF configured and aligned, that's fantastic as well. It does a couple of things. SPF can be checked very quickly. It can be checked effectively before the receiver has even gotten to the data portion of the message. So it can be checked very quickly. Although to do the complete DMARC check, the receiver does have to, of course, ingest the entire message because it needs that from header in order to check alignment and to know what domain that should be done for. But again, if possible, get SPF working. Make sure, of course, that DKIM is working and is properly aligned. And then you're going to start to see little by little the fallout, the tiny little bits here and there that are not passing. And at some point you're going to say, well, 99.99% of all of our mail is passing. This other 0.1% looks like possibly breakage due to forwarding, or it might be some malicious actor using our domain to try to sell Viagra or fake Rolexes or offshore brides or advertise a pornography website. In those instances, you may make a decision and say, yeah, we're going to lose a tiny 0.01% of our mail, but we're going to go to reject anyway. And keeping in mind that a lot of those failures, Google and others may override that policy because they'll actually know that the message was okay because they checked it at the beginning, and there will be some small amount of attrition. There will be a few messages that may no longer be properly delivered, and that may be okay. It really depends on your tolerance for having one or two messages not make it to their destination versus the risk of having people impersonate your mail. I'll give you a hint. Most of the banks that I work with, they are going to lean much more on the side of security, and they're not going to care if somebody who's relaying their mail through Cornell University over to their Yahoo account, and then relaying from their Yahoo account over to their Gmail account, and finally from their Gmail account over to their work account, which happens to be on Office 365. They're probably not going to care if that person doesn't get their statements. When they stop getting their statements, then presumably that person will go and update their email address and give the bank their real email address. The bank will lean on that side of security over those onesie-twosie messages. If you are a tiny little shop that has never been impersonated ever, and yet you've got you have a very small number of customers, but a handful of them are in that sort of relaying situation, you may opt to just go to P equals quarantine and tell folks that, hey, if our mail goes to your spam folder, you might have to look in your spam folder for it. At least you're offering some protection from spoofing, but you're not offering as good a protection as you would get if you were to get to P equals reject. One other comment I will make on the differences between P equals quarantine versus P equals reject. If you have P equals reject, the receiving side will issue an error code during the SMTP transaction. That error code is typically a 550 error code, and it will have some additional information associated with it, something along the lines of, mail for this domain was rejected due to the domain's policy. And they may have a link in there to their postmaster website, which may describe DMARC and may explain that, yeah, that the message was blocked for that reason. What that means from an end user, let's suppose now I use my Agari.com email account, and I send an email off to some old buddy of mine using his alumni address at my alma mater, and he's got some weird setup where it's routing, through Google, and then it's breaking the signature, and then it's sending over to Yahoo, and Yahoo ultimately is rejecting the message. If I have P equals reject, I'm ultimately going to get a bounce back. I'm sure you've seen this before. If you've ever misaddressed an email, you get a bounce back. It says, oh, we couldn't deliver to that user. It's an invalid address. In this case, I would get back a bounce message, but it's going to tell me that it failed because of my company's DMARC policy. This is very valuable. I now understand that my message didn't get to its destination. Now, suppose I had a P equals quarantine. I will get no such information. That message will end up in my buddy's spam folder over at Yahoo. Again, remember, he's routing from his university over to Google, over to Yahoo. Something gets broken along the way. It's going to end up in his Yahoo spam folder, and maybe he never sees it, but I'm going to have no idea as an end user who just sent this person a message that that's what happened to the message, that it went to a spam folder. So to me, going to reject is better because the user is going to get that immediate feedback that that message was undeliverable. In any case, we are now coming up on the top of the hour. If there are no more questions, I will, oh, we do have one or two more. What was the website that I mentioned that I can check the domain reputation with? Ah, that's excellent. Let me see if I can find it. So let's see, sender base lookup. Okay, so there is this domain here, Telos Intelligence Reputation Center. I'm going to put the answer here. This will get you the Cisco one. So if I have that original IP address, I can look it up here, and they're going to give me all sorts of information, and they're telling me a lot of different things. They don't directly give me that sender-based score, that 3.5 that we saw before, but they are giving me a lot of information about that particular IP address. They're telling me that its email volume is, a 5.0 on, I guess, I don't know what the exact scale is. That last month it was a 4.9. That's a 33% increase. They're giving me all sorts of information. The other thing that there is senderscore.org. This belongs to a company called Return Path. And similarly, I can go and look up an IP address here, and it's going to give me some information on that. And in this case, it's giving a 98 out of 100. So Return Path says this is a good server. If I read through all the very technical details over on the Cisco site, I would similarly see that it has a good reputation. I'll give you guys the other one here on the answer. 1 second. There, I'll send to all. And here is the other one. If you guys want to go and copy that, that should have just shown up hopefully on the answer side, if you wanted to go and do your own lookup on that. And with that, we are at the top of the hour. I think I was supposed to end with contact information. Here you go. If you guys want to take a look at that, we are offering complimentary trials to folks that have been on the webinar today. If you are interested, please go to agari.com/GCA bootcamp. Again, if you make note of that URL, I'll leave that up for a few more moments. But again, you don't have to use Agari. There are other vendors out there. There's always going to be a price performance trade-off, up to and including doing it yourself, writing your own scripts, dumping it into a spreadsheet, or doing whois lookups, things of that nature. You need to make the decision what makes the most sense for your business. Does it make sense to get the biggest, baddest, most expensive tool out there, but it will shorten the time that it takes to get to DMARC reject? And if you have a huge, large, complex organization, that's probably your best route. If you are a small mom and pop shop, or you just have a hobbyist domain, there are much more cost-effective solutions out there, up to and including what I showed you that you can do from a command line. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.